Living my bucolic life, we have the city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses in to the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello, and on today's episode of making the cardigan jacket, I'm going to start focusing on the sleeve interfacing, and the sleeve lining. And the way I'm going to do this is probably not like anybody else does, but it makes sense to me, and it's a way that I can do it with the least amount of fiddly hand stitching, but still having a nice garment. So let me turn the camera down and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so the first thing that I want to show you is where the sleeve is right now. And this is the wrong side, of course. I've got my three-piece sleeve sewed together. Just kind of let it sit there. Now this is the interfacing piece that's supposed to go on here. Okay? And you can cut it out of regular interfacing. That is just fine. See how the grain line is at a bias? All right? That's important because this is actually curved. What I'm going to be using instead of this piece is this. It's Wigan. It's like a very, very starched muslin, but it is cut on a bias. It's not fusible. It's a sew-in. But it's fabulous for cuffs, for edges. I'm actually going to be using this for that bottom edge interfacing that's going to go around the whole bottom of the jacket. And it is cut on a bias, so you know we're ahead there. Now, on the interfacing piece, there's a seam allowance here, okay? I'm not going to be putting this into the seam allowance because I want it to be a nice fold. So, a 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 catalog, you know, if you are interested in where I got it, that's where I got it. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually come on here and mark where my 5/8 inch seam allowance is. Just kind of walking my little ruler around here. Okay, so that is where my seam allowance is. And what I'm going to be doing is placing my Wigan at the edge here. I'm going to place it actually just over that mark, okay? Just barely over it, because I want to make sure that it comes in there, but I don't want the bulk in there, if that makes any sense. So with it overlapping that stitch line, I have it overlapping maybe 1/8 of an inch at the most, between a 1/16 and an 1/8. Not a whole lot, but enough that my stitches should grab it, okay? And that will lock it in. But because it is on a bias, I can curve it around this edge over here. You know what, I'm just going to baste it, so I actually need to come back and do it on the sides also, but for right now, I'm just going to cut this really quick and run a row of hand basting stitches just across this edge, just so I can make sure it's going to stay nicely just into that seam allowance and I don't have to deal with the pins. But this is all basted all the way to the edge, and I've drawn in the seam allowance from this dot down. And I've drawn it both on top and underneath my Wigan here. So what I'm going to do is fold this at my dot here so that this line that I drew on it matches up with this line here. Okay, it's going to give me that miter edge. Stick a pin right there. And then let's say this is the one that's going to be going here. Okay, and if I place it, you know, like I did over here, so it is just barely over the stitching line. I'm just going to put one more little pin here and clip it right here. Okay, so now when I look at it, I can see where they're going to overlap, and that's where I'm going to need to have them join. So let me crease it both ways there. Okay, so now I have that. I'm going to go ahead, stick a pin right there, unpin these two, and lift it up. And then I'm just going to run a hand-basted stitch right down that little crease, and then I can clip it off with regular or pinking shears or whatever and open it up flat, and I'll have a nice little mitered corner that'll fit exactly what my angle is, because sometimes the angles are a little more or a little less, and this just seems to work for me. Okay, so with those basted together, I'm just going to come back in here and trim it real quick. So now I can open it back up and paste these just like I did on the bottom, just baste it straight along there, and here where they meet, I'm just going to finger press that open. I think that that's about all it needs. It doesn't need to be secured anymore. But when I start basting on this side, I'm going to start over here, come over this so it stays flat over here, and then trim these little edges that are hanging off. And I'll do this same procedure on this side over here also. So I'm going to end up with Wigan on the inside, just coming straight down, over, and up. Once all of that is sewn on, I am coming back and doing catch stitching around the top just to keep it nice. You know, it also goes relatively fast. It just it's a process. It is a process. So even if I was just using regular interfacing, I would not use fusible for this. I would use a sew-in for this, and I would do the same steps for the regular interfacing also with the catch stitching. All right, so these pieces are done now. This is what it looks like. There's little catch stitches at the edges. So sorry that it's white on white, you know. Basted around this edge. This edge is mitered. I need to clip those little corners, but these are done pretty much. What I'm going to do right now is skip over to my lining pieces. I have lining cut out of the 3 sleeve pieces, and I'm going to sew them together in the same way as this. So I end up with one big flat piece that's sewed together just like this. And I'm not going to show you as I sew it because you know how to do that, but what I will tell you is as I sew, I'll sew it at 5/8 inch, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to serge both raw edges together and press those towards the middle of the back, towards this underarm seam here. Alrighty, so here's my lining, and after I sewed them, serged these, pressed them towards the middle, then I came around and I serged all the way up, around, over here and down. I didn't serge this. I don't think that's necessary right now. But before we go any further, what you need to decide is how you're going to handle buttonholes. Now, there are 2 buttons that go on here. And on your pattern, there is the buttonhole placement. So you need to choose if you're going to make buttonholes or not, what kind of buttonholes and all of that. So because I made my front bound buttonholes, if I was going to make buttonholes on this side, on my sleeves, they should also be bound buttonholes. But you know what? I got over to this point and I'm just not in the mood. It's just as simple as that. I'm just not in the mood to. So I am just going to make non-functioning buttons on this. I think that that's going to be fine. They'll basically be sewn on, but there won't be functioning buttonholes behind them. It'll give the impression, but they won't work. So, you know, that's a personal choice, and I know that one of the hallmarks of an authentic Chanel jacket is that all of their buttonholes work on their sleeves. It's like a travesty for them to have a non-functioning button right here, as far as I know. But this is not Chanel, this is Marie, and this is the way I'm doing it. So, with that in mind, there's a couple things that I need to do right now. Now, you probably can't see, but I can lightly see where my basting line is. You know what? Just so that you can see it, I'm going to go ahead and draw that in with my pen. Hang on one second. This is just so you can see it. Where I'm drawing this line is where my basting stitches are, and since my pen will come out in the wash, then, or when I iron it, then it's not a big problem right here. All right. So that's where my basting stitches is. And so when I'm sewing it, I'm actually going to be sewing it on this, from this side up, so I can see exactly where to stitch. But before I do that, I need to put some trim on here. Now, I made up all my trim last night, but I was a little bit short on the gold. So I'm going to have enough to go along the bottom, but I won't have enough to come up this side to make the L, okay? You can see they have it going over and up into the seam. If you were to be doing that, what you would do is when you're placing your trim, you would also find the line over here you want to put it, and put my point right around here. Well, here, I'll just draw it in. All right. This is my main dot here where all of this matches up, okay? What you would do is you would form your trim into an L, however is best for your trim. You know, if it's mitering it, great. If it's just something like this, what I would do is form it into an L, take a couple little stitches just to cinch that in so it wants to stay that way, and then bring it up. But then, as you're up here, you would pull it into the seam line, and however you do on one side, match it on the other side, okay? And then that way, when you sew this, it's going to just take care of this part up there, all right? But since I don't have enough, I am just going to go across here, and I'm going to go all the way into my seam line, and that's how I'm going to secure the ends on this. So, just like the pockets, if you remember when I was doing the trim on the pockets, I decided that if I mark it 1/2 of an inch from where that fold line was going to be, and then that's how I figured out the placement for the pockets. I'm going to be attempting to do a very similar placement for the sleeve here. So this line here is 1/2 an inch from my stitching line where I have it basted. All right, so before I do anything else, what I'm going to need to do is attach this. So let's go over to the ironing board. All right, I'm going to try to do it from this angle and see if that protects my camera from all that steam. So what I have is a piece of stitch witchery that I have trimmed to about 1/4 inch wide, because that is wide enough to cover most of my trim without poking out the sides, okay? And so I'm going to lay this stitch witchery along my trim placement line. It's kind of invisible, so I'm going to be really careful here. Okay. Now I'm going to start my trim over here, and I'm just going to iron it. Now, as soon as I iron it, my basting stitch line is going to disappear, but that's okay. I mainly put it on there so you could see where the placement for this line is going to be. So, and as I go, I'm just double checking that everything is in the right spot. Okay, that side is on. I'm going to flip it over and also iron the back. Very steamy. My glasses are steamed up. Okay, I think this is secure enough that I can go back and stitch it on. Alright, and just like on the pocket, I am going to hand stitch it on. And I'm just stitching on the white part of my braid. I'm basically just going to take a couple stitches to get it started here. And I'm just going to take like 2 little felling stitches on each little swoop of the white braid. So say this is my little swoop there. I brought it up right here, and I'm just going to go down, come back up a little further down the little swoop. Try not to get tingly. And take another stitch. So just like that, it goes pretty quick because they're large spacing in between the stitches. Okay, so here's my sleeve now. All of this is stitched down, and now I am going to actually sew my lining on. What I'm going to be doing is sewing it from this dot right here that we marked. Okay, I'm going to be sewing it from that dart down all the way over here and back up this side and ending up here. Now I'm going to pin it looking at this side so that I can make sure that my lining isn't sliding all over the place, but I'm sticking my pin heads way out because I'm actually going to be sewing it while looking at the fabric side, this side over here. So I hope you can see, because I'm looking at this side as I'm sewing, I was able to really carefully follow my basting line, and I was able to make sure I caught the very edge of my stabilizer here and was staying nice and straight. So that's very helpful. So now what I want to do is remark a couple little dots because they have disappeared over time. The first one is this little dot right there. I'm marking that, and I pinned it right up here because I want to clip to it. Right, almost to it, not all the way, okay? And also this little dot over here, I'm going to clip almost to that also. All right, that's going to come in handy. But I'm going to need to understitch this bottom part, okay? Now, I do it after I've sewn these. It's helpful for making sure my corners are going to be square. But because of that, I'm not going to be able to get my sewing machine all the way into the corner as I understitch. So I'm just going to go as far as I can, all right? But when I'm doing this, I'm pushing all of my seam allowance towards the lining. And actually, I'll be doing it from this direction here. So all of this seam allowance is getting pushed towards the lining, and I'll be starting up here, and I'll be sewing about 1/8 of an inch in on the lining side, straight down as far as I can get into this corner, which is about right here. All right, so I've got my understitching done. You can see this is it, running right around there. So now I'm going to flip this back, and I need to trim some stuff down here. So cutting that trim's a little bit harsh. So I'm just going to cut my corners first. Cutting off that trim, and then come back with my pinking shears and trim the rest of this. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this right side out and hope for the best here. Get my little chopstick. And push out that lovely little corner. And this one here. Okay, so I need to go to my iron and press this, clip these little threads. At this point, if there's exposed basting stitches down here, I'm going to go ahead and clip that and pull them out because they are not needed anymore. Some of them I've sewed over and they've disappeared into the seam, so it's not a big issue. But anyway, you go to my ironing board, press this under, and press over here and up to this point really well. I'll be right back. All right, so this is what my sleeve looks like right now. You know, the wrong sides are together, everything's good. All right, so I'm going to sew my lining seam together first. So with my lining side up, I'm going to fold it together here. Just fold these garment sides out of the way and go ahead and pin this center, what do we call this, a center arm seam, center forearm seam all the way down to where those dots are that we clipped. I don't want to stitch my garment fabric, so I'm making sure it's out of the way. Okay. So this is what it looks like, and I'm going to be sewing all the way to that point, all the way to the top at a regular 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I can just slide this sleeve onto a sleeve board and press it open. Okay, so I've just sewn that seam. I'm going to press it open, so I'm just going to push my little roll inside here and press it open really quickly. Just to make it nice and flat. Okay, and now I'm ready for the next part. So what I need to do now is sew my garment fabric together. So what I need to do is turn this whole thing inside out, like so. Okay, so I turned the whole thing inside out. Pull this little guy's folded. Okay, like this. Then I'm going to take my lining and pull it down. All right, so that this part is exposed. Okay, now I can go ahead and pin it, starting at the top and working my way down. And just the same, where the shorter one stops, that's where I'm going to stop sewing, right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sew this at 5/8 inch. Okay, so I've just sewed it, okay, and I'm going to press it flat first to set that seam. Okay. Now once it's pressed flat, then I'm going to slide it into my roll, or slide my roll into it, I should say, and open it up. and press it open. Alright, so I'm going to press it with my steamy iron. Okay, and then come back with my block o' wood. And try to, optimally you're holding it on there until it's cold and dry, but that's not reality, you know? So let me go ahead and pull this out. And now I should be able to slide my sleeve back right side out and get everything settled. Hang on 1 second. So while I'm working on getting it all together, I am just going to pin this seam that we just sewed and the lining together up here at the top, just to keep things somewhat organized up there. Now the longer flap is actually on the inside, so that on the outside, this flap that's in line with the seam, that's the outside one, okay? And I think it's going to work pretty well. All right, actually, I need to go inside for a little bit and work on some things. So, let me just put a clip on this here, just to hold it in place. I'm going to reach inside here and pull it inside out again. All right, so this is what it looks like, just flipping it inside out. What I'm going to do is open this and fold it in. It's this little edge here. I'm going to fold it down and pop these raw edges in, okay? I'm going to pin that really quick up here. And so I'm just going to do a little bit of hand stitching just to get everything nice and secure and settled. I actually kind of clipped a little too much over here, but when I have my needle and thread, I can fix that. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to put a couple pins over here where my would-be buttons would be, so that that's going to stay secure, okay? I have this pinned where I think I want it, but before I start sewing it, I'm just going to lock my needle here. I'm actually going to turn it right side out again, just to make sure it looks good on the outside in that position before I stitch. So I'm going to pull it back out here without stabbing myself, hopefully. So this is open right here. This is where I'm going to put my buttons that will not work. And this is the big joining point right here. And I think it's okay. I think once I press it, it's going to be just fine the way that I have it pinned here. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and flip it right side out, inside out one more time. All right. So, grabbing my needle, I have a little fold here. I actually, it's a matter of clipping something, and it's a lining, so I'm not going to stress about it that much. If it was on the outside, I would be fixing it, but because it's in the lining, it's because of something that wasn't clipped exactly right. I have a little pucker, but you know how that goes. So what I'm going to do is just come down here, pick up a couple of invisible threads from my garment fabric that's underneath that lining, come back up and grab the edge of this and the lining fabric. So I'm basically whip stitching everything together at once. Okay, so I'm going to keep on going to the corner here, and at the corner I'm just going to make a couple stitches to hold it a little more securely, and then I'm actually going to go down this front edge, a little less than an inch, but just enough that it's going to hold that position over here too. And again, I'm just barely grabbing. I can feel through the lining, and I'm just grabbing like one thread of the garment fabric through that lining. And I'm going to call that good right there. So at this point I'm just going to take a couple stitches to hold it in, and one sideways as I do. Now this isn't the only thing that's going to hold this. I'm also going to have those buttons securely buttoned, well, stitched on right here, and that's going to hold it too. So on this pattern, this is where the buttonhole is. Closer to this end of the buttonhole is where your button placement should be. Okay, so I am going to punch, oh, why did I do that? I'm going to go ahead and punch my holes right where I believe it should be, which is right there. You see, it's just before the end. And to get my marks, I'm going to place this over the edge, you know, giving myself my 5/8 inch seam allowance around the edge here. And make a dot there and a dot here. Okay, so that's where my buttons are going to be. I actually changed my mind on the buttons I'm going to be using. I got a set of these standard crown blazer buttons, but they're nice and shiny, and I think that'll work. So I'm going to put the smaller ones on the cuffs down here, and then I have a larger version for the front. So I'm just going to go ahead and button these, not button them, sew them on nice and securely. Actually, I'm going to stick a pin right here in between them to hold it where I want it to be as I'm sewing them so that things don't get out of whack. So it's going to look like it can open. You'll see a gap in there and everything, but it actually won't. So let me go ahead and get started. Now, you've probably seen me sew on a button a lot of times, but I'm going to show you one more time. I thread my needle differently when I'm sewing on a button, and especially one like this where I want to make sure it's very secure and also that it's neat. So let me get a needle threader. All right. So with a needle threader, I'm going to put that through the eye of my needle and put both ends. And I am using a strong thread, something like that, extra strong hand quilting thread. It's just a good solid thread. I have lots of it too. All right, and I can pull both ends through my needle, put on my thimble, and I'm actually going to start from the top because it's easier. I'm just going to go straight down and leaving the big loop on the top, come straight back up. Okay, before I pull it all the way, I'm going to pull my needle through the loop so it's nice and secure. There's no messy dot here. You're going to see my stitches, but I'll try to keep those fairly neat. And that way, I'll move this pin, and that way I can go ahead, stitch my button on, and like normal. And these actually are kind of directional. There's a little crown, so I want to make sure that I'm stitching in a direction so the crown is facing upright. So there she is. I think it looks adorable. Oh yeah. I just have it pinned up here, but you can get an idea of what it's going to look like. I have those shoulder pads just placed in there, and my trim, of course, draped around the corner. Okay, but yeah, very cute. Very cute indeed. So we will see you next time. Bye-bye.